It's about 17 minutes past 7 on this Friday morning. Look, after what felt like a fairly protracted time in terms of council elections, of getting results in, tallying everything up, Dubbo regional councillors were sworn in over Christmas and New Year break, and then last night the council held its first ordinary council meeting. Now, Mathew Dickerson is the mayor for Dubbo Regional Council, returning to council seat for the first time since its amalgamation with Wellington. And Mathew Dickerson, good morning to you.
Yeah, good morning, Nick.
What's the feeling of the new council after last night's meeting?
Still a very enthusiastic and a council that really wants to get in there and get things done. So there's this real feeling of optimism there, I think, and that didn't change last night. And it was the first experience for 8 of the people there last night. So it was a bit of a learning curve, but everything went smoothly. We had a council meeting, we made decisions, everything went according to plan, and they got a bit of confidence as the meeting went through. So look, I think it's still that real feeling, I suppose, of the shiny new council, and we're still out there getting things done.
Got that new council smell still.
Yeah, absolutely right, which is fine. And we sat down afterwards and had dinner afterwards and just had a bit of a debrief, and some of the councillors were talking about some things. Oh, I'm not sure if I did that right. Or no, that was all fine. Everything went well. So they're still just not totally sure of everything they're doing, but that's understandable. That's the very first meeting. And the meetings are obviously sent out via the net now, so there's that shiny glare of sitting there going, everything I do is being watched by hundreds of people at home and people in the gallery, so it can be a little bit daunting, but to their credit, I mean, all councillors moved a notice of motion last night, and they had an idea, and they came forward and brought that up, and there was, like a normal council meeting, there was debate around a few issues. There was a DA that came forward, and there was a bit of indecision about whether we should go with that DA or not go with that DA, and in the end that was deferred till next month. And I think that was a good decision by council, because the very first DA that's come to council when you're brand new on council, there's a lot to get your head wrapped around. So rather than make a decision for the sake of making a decision, I think the correct decision was made there to say, well, we need to get our head wrapped around this, let's defer that for a month.
Looking at some of the notices of motions, we know there was, as you said, DAs, talks about housing, parks, beautification of shopping precincts. This feels like, and maybe a bit of a relief for many people, this feels like very normal council business.
yeah, you're right. It was very normal council business, and I think the councillors were keen to get in and do things. It's actually a shorter time frame with this council. 2 years and 9 months is this council term. Normally it's 4 years. So I think there's also that feeling that, well, we can't sit around on our hands and just think about things for too long. We've got to get in and just start doing things. So I think you're spot on there that some of those notices that came through made sense. They were things that people just wanted to make sure they were progressing. And it wasn't so much about putting their stamp on. It was about just let's make sure we go through and have these things happening as soon as possible.
Look, you did mention that there's many first-time councillors there. What support and what training is available to them?
Yeah, so there's some training. I remember back when I first started on council, we did do a fair bit of training, but it wasn't compulsory back in those days. It was really each council just get in and start doing it, and if you get a bit of training, then happy days. That's changed a bit, probably because of bad behaviour across the state over many years. There's now some compulsory training, but the training that we've done has probably been a bit over and above that compulsory training, which is good as well, because again, when you get onto council, just understanding what council does, understanding how much water we've got to treat. There's a water treatment plant that can treat up to 80 megalitres a day there. We've got a sewage treatment plant. We've got businesses. We've got a cafe that we run in terms of the cultural centre cafe. We've got a caravan park. We've got an airport. There's all these different facets to council and council business. So learning about those is important. And then you've also got the code of conduct training. You've got the performance management of your CEO, because we only employ one staff member. So we've got that whole performance management process of the CEO there. So there's all these bits of training. So about 2 weeks ago, over a space of about 8 days, there were 4 full days of training. So credit to all the councillors. Every single councillor turned up to every single training session. They're having to get time off work. And for our Wellington councillors, they're having to travel down from Wellington and attend those full days. There's childcare involved for some councillors. So there's all these things, but they all have been to every single part of it and have participated really well in all of those. So there's a fair bit of that support, but there's nothing, Nick, like just sitting there in your first meeting. You can do training session after training session, but when it comes down to sitting there in your first meeting, that's when you go, oh wow, I've got to try and actually do this in the real world now. So that was an interesting process as well. But again, they all came through with flying colours.
I'm getting the sense from you that this is a not only enthusiastic council, a council that's taking this very seriously, but one that sounds quite collegiate, quite willing to work together.
Yeah, and you hope that's always the case. I suppose the really different thing about this council is there is no baggage that's been brought over from a previous council. You might have had previous councils that I've been involved with where councillors were on one council and they might have had some disagreements or there might have been a bit of tension between a couple of councillors, and then you get a new council on, but some of those councillors were still there and some of that tension might have still been there. So even though you might have had this great new council, we're all going to work together and have a great council together, just underlying was this little bit of tension that you knew was being dragged through, that bit of baggage that came along. This one, we've got 8 new councillors, and of the 2 previous councillors, we've never been on council together before. So Vicky was on the last council and then I was on councils before that. So we've actually got no one in the whole group that's ever been on a council together before. So we have got that entire approach of saying, well, let's work really well together and let's make it the way it should be and not have all these preconceived ideas of things that have happened before. Let's make it the way it should be.
Mathew Dickerson, Mayor of Dubbo Regional Council, in about 4 weeks' time, I think just a little bit over, obviously a big opportunity to represent the region at the upcoming Local Government New South Wales Special Conference. Any idea who's going to be going along with you?
Well, hopefully everyone. And this is one of those things that I did talk to councillors about beforehand. Sure, we've got technically 4 voting delegates that go along to that conference to vote on motions that are brought forward. But I did say one of my really valuable learning experiences in my early council career was going to those conferences, because it's not so much about sitting there in a room, putting your hand up to vote, or they use electronic machines now to vote for those various motions that come forward. It's about talking to other people. Oh, what council are you from? Oh, what do you do with this? How do you deal with that? And you come back with all these different ideas and just a different appreciation. Absolutely, when you haven't been on council before, getting that broader view across the 130 odd councils across New South Wales to see how things are done, you get a real eye-opening experience. So again, it comes down to people's occupations, their jobs, their day-to-day lives. They've got to be able to get time away. But the recommendation that went through council last night essentially was for everyone that can make it, we want all of them to go. So I would love to see all 10. I don't know that all 10 will be able to get away for those few days, but I'd love to see as many as possible.
That does sound like an expensive proposition, obviously taking all 10 councillors, but you sound like it's worth the cost.
I think so, and there is money that is in the budget from last year. Obviously, we haven't set this current budget, and that was one of the things I checked when I did talk about that. I actually checked with our staff to make sure there was money in that budget. There is an allocation of funds for each councillor each year for ongoing training, which I think is important, and part of that training process is obviously attending conferences, because that is a really valuable training experience. So it is in the budget. It does cost money. There's obviously a registration fee, there's a cost to accommodate councillors, there's a cost to actually go, but in the whole scheme of things, we're managing an organisation that's worth $3 billion worth of assets. We manage a budget over $200 million a year to spend, in this case per councillor, it might cost maybe $1,000 per councillor. To spend that kind of money to help the education and ongoing education of councillors, to me, is money well and truly worth investing.
Look, I'll let you get on with your day in a second, but you did mention a DA that was put to the side till next council meeting. Was that the boarding house at Macleay Street?
Yeah, that's the one. So we had 2 people in our public forum session put a presentation forward about their dissatisfaction with the ability for that to go ahead. The recommendation from the staff was for it to go ahead. It complies with all the laws, although one of the public forum speakers disagreed with one of those aspects, but it complied with all the laws. So if you looked at the staff recommendation, you'd say, let's go ahead. But the problem there was that, again, for councillors, this is all very new. It's a development application. There's a whole range of laws to adhere to. There's a plan to look at there. And then there were 8 objections from the neighbours there. So one of the councillors put forward an amendment to defer it. And the concept there was to look at going over there, doing a site visit, talking to more of those objectors, getting more of the advice from the staff to really make sure whichever way we go, either refuse it or approve that particular DA, is the right decision from a broader context. The really tough decision for councillors there, and it was a good actually introduction on the first meeting. We talked in some of the previous motions, for example, the housing motion that Matt Wright put forward was about trying to give some more housing for Dubbo. We need more housing, more affordable housing. There was some discussion in general terms about some of that. And then we have a DA that comes up to supply more housing and boarding house housing for people. So the obvious answer was, quick, let's get that in there. Let's go straight ahead with it. But again, councils have got to be comfortable that everything's being done in the best possible outcome for the broad community. So I think deferral was the right decision there.
All right, Matthew Dickerson, we'll leave it there, but we look forward to talking more about that development application. It's, I think, a great interest to a lot of people in the area. Matthew Dickerson, thank you very much. He is the Mayor of Dubbo Regional Council. After a protracted time getting the results through, Dubbo Council met for the first time just last night in an ordinary meeting.